All right, welcome in everybody. Hope you're all having a great morning, afternoon, wherever you're calling in from. I've got Kate here. We're gonna let people trickle in, so grab some water, grab some coffee, whatever you would like, some snacks, and introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're calling in from, and what you're excited to hear from Kate. We also have a couple fun polls. This one is the end of August. How are you feeling? Let us know. A few more days of summer. Yeah.
Oh, not me. I live in the southern United States and it is too hot, too sticky. We are ready for fall.
I do enjoy visiting the South, and then I go in the summer and I'm just roasting. And I remember I was not meant to be in hot weather.
I'm the opposite. I'll never move up north. I'll never move to a colder place. I'd rather be completely sweaty than cold.
The funny thing is I say all this and then Boston will get cold and snowy, and then I'll be, flip-flopping and say I hate winter. So I'm just,
Well, you can come
never happy with the weather. Yeah, I'll snowbird.
It'll be nice and warm. Yeah, be a snowbird.
There we go. Be a young snowbirder. Works. All right, come on in, everybody. We'll get started in a minute or two. Keep saying hello in the chat and tell us how you're feeling about end of August, end of summer. Hi, Erica. Santa Barbara sounds nice. I'm jealous.
But you don't have seasons there. Same in Ventura that Dee's saying she's from.
Oh, that's right. Northwest Washington. That does sound chilly. All right. Okay. I think we will get started. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. For those of you who are new to our AMA series, welcome. Glad to have you. We like to do these really casual monthly discussions. We do have a discussion guide planned that has some questions that you've sent in ahead of time, so thank you for that. But please continue to drop any questions you have for Kate in the chat. We'll do our best to answer as many of them as possible. And also just share any of your thoughts. A lot of the best insights at these AMAs come from the audience. So definitely be active in the chat, share your thoughts, share your opinions when you disagree or agree. Before I turn the time over to Kate to introduce herself, just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Lauren. I'm the content marketing manager at Rally. We are building a user research CRM that helps organizations streamline and automate their participant management and recruitment. Feel free to check us out. And yeah, I am so excited to have Kate here. I met her earlier this year at Advancing Research, and since then have been dying to have her on for an AMA. So very excited to have her here, and I'll turn the time over to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, I had a great time meeting you too at Advancing Research and talking about some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So I've been really looking forward to this. So I'm Kate Moran, and I am a VP at Nielsen Norman Group. I know some of you are familiar with Nielsen Norman Group, or as we call it, NNG. I've seen in the chat, we have somebody here who attended an in-person NNG conference back in 2001, which is a throwback. So that's kind of a good indication, an illustration of how long we've been around. We're going on 30 years, coming up on 30 years of existence. And in that time, we have really focused on trying to be a useful resource for people like you, for people just trying to do the best research that you can with the tools that you're given. So we have a big focus on like practical research, but trying to balance that with rigor. And I imagine that these are going to be two topics we're going to really dive into in this talk. A little bit about me specifically. I'm VP of Research and Content, which is my literal dream job. So I love it. I get to think about what's happening in our industry, like what guidance and advice people like you all are looking for and needing, and then help my team figure out. All right, let's go find answers to the questions. Let's write articles that are going to end the debates and the endless arguments you might be having with your stakeholders or with your teammates. So that's really the role that we try to fill. We do that by publishing a lot of free resources at nnGroup.com. So articles and videos. We have like templates and posters and all kinds of like fun free downloads. So definitely check those out if you haven't already. But we also provide training and consulting services. So a piece of my background that I'm going to be drawing on today pretty heavily is my almost 10 years at NNG, going on 14 years in the field. And I've spent a lot of that time training people to do research or helping them to do better research, faster research, more reliable. And so this is something that I spent a lot of time thinking about, and I'm excited to share my perspective on these things and also hear from all of you, hopefully in the chat.
Amazing. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I think your role at NNG is super interesting, and I love that it's your dream job. That is a treat not many people can have. So really excited to hear your insights from that. We have a lot of topics we want to cover, so I'm just going to jump right in, and again, drop questions in the chat. We'll defer to those when possible, but wanted to start focused on like upskilling your current researchers. So what strategies have you found most effective for helping like upskill existing researchers and staying on top of kind of industry trends and different things like that?
Yeah, that's a good one. So research is interesting, and I guess you could kind of more broadly apply this to UX in general. In some ways, things don't change that much because human beings don't change that much. Like the way that people think, and you know, the kind of the best sort of essential tactics, or I guess you might think about them as like philosophies for like working with your users and figuring out what they need. Those things don't really change very much. And it's funny, like we really have perspective on that, like this company being around for 30 years, like almost the entire existence of the field. We've really seen that to be the case, that like some of the recommendations that my colleagues gave all the way back even in the 90s are still true and accurate today. And so I think that's true for research. I will say though, there are constantly new technologies. The pace of the technology changes quickly. So the kinds of things that we're studying is constantly changing. Like we're having to figure out, okay, what are the right approaches to studying VR products or AR or XR, all these different realities. And so like I've seen a lot of changes in terms of what people are studying. On the other side, I have seen changes in how we do research based on the tools that are now available. And I've been in the field long enough that I can remember the days where like I was doing my note taking and my analysis all in Excel.
Wow.
I mean, I still do that for quant research, obviously, but I mean, like my qualitative research analysis was in Excel. And I remember when I had to contact like market research firms to find my participants because there weren't tools like Rally or user interviews or like these online recruitment tools. So we're kind of in a lot of ways like in a golden age of research tools, I think, compared to where we've been in the past. And so in terms of like continually upskilling existing researchers, I think that's a big piece of it, kind of thinking about, all right, how can we use what's available now really to accelerate workflows, because moving quickly is so essential to working with the environments that most of us, you know, are in and kind of have to adapt to. That's a big piece of it. And for that kind of continuous learning, it's not revolutionary. Like you've probably heard this advice before, but like lunch and learns work. They just do. Like those little bite-sized bits of continual learning I find to be the most effective because everybody's got day jobs. Like at NNG, all of us have like 3.5 different day jobs that we do. So like, some of you probably can relate. So we've got to make this easy to consume. So that's one way, like organizing lunch and learns, maybe that's a Friday over roughly lunchtime. We're fully remote, so that's a little bit different for everybody, but having just like bite-sized accessible ways where it's easy for people to continue to learn. That's what I find to be the most effective.
Totally. And I know before this AMA started, we were talking about how with COVID, a lot of training and opportunities to upskill and teach people has had to move from in-person to online. And you've experienced this a lot with your trainings. How do you have any tips for these fully remote teams that are trying to engage both their researchers and non-researchers in educational purposes? Because that can be super hard to lock people in, keep them like locked in and engaged.
Yeah. I definitely do. I like to say that I was into remote research before it was cool. So pre-pandemic, I really loved remote research for a lot of reasons. That I think it enables accessing our participants that otherwise we may not be able to study conveniently for us or for them. It helps us, everybody, literally, I've never encountered a research team that's like, you know what, we have all the funding we could possibly need and all the time that we could possibly use. Never seen that situation. So, I love remote research allows you to stretch that budget a little bit. And if you have a fully remote team, maybe you're doing a lot of remote research and it's very, very rare that you're doing anything in person. I will say, just as I said, I love remote research. I do. I love remote work. I've worked in literally every job I've had. I've either been fully or hybrid remote. So get that out of the way. Big fan of remoteness. However, it is really hard to train people to do good research remotely. It's also hard to keep stakeholders engaged remotely, I've found. Certainly not impossible. But when you are in like a lab, like a usability lab, focus group lab, whatever that may be, wherever you're doing your research and you're with a team and you have observers with you and you can kind of just casually debrief after every session in between each participant, there's something so organic about the reflection and discussion that happens. Like what everyone in the room has watched, like we've all been there together, and we can have this sort of, it's almost like serendipity. That's something that you lose with remoteness. Now you can recreate it. You just have to be really intentional about it. So one of my bits of advice that I tend to give people when they're running remote research and they do want people to be engaged, get people to agree, all right, these are the the sessions I'm going to attend. Give people jobs. Because otherwise it is, and I'm totally guilty of this as well, otherwise it's way too easy to be like sucked into your email and be like, well, I'll just respond to that one real quick, and then suddenly you've lost track of what's happening. So what I will typically do is be very intentional about who's invited to observe. Like, let's say we have like a content strategist who's going to be observing, giving that person a specific content related job. Like, I want you to make sure that you're taking notes on whatever happens related to, the copy or the articles on editgroup.com or whatever it is we're studying. So creating a sense of accountability and a kind of a sense of like, oh, if I don't do this, then I'm going to be kind of like have messed this up a little bit. So that's helpful. I also think it's really important when you're scheduling synchronous remote sessions. So like moderated usability testing, interviews, make sure you're also scheduling a little bit of buffer time after each session, like right after, as soon as the participant leaves. What I see teams doing too frequently is, and this is fine if you're under the wire and you're just trying to get research done quickly, but I see teams schedule, all right, we have an hour session, break for 15 minutes. We have another hour session coming up after that. If you're trying to help people learn how to do research correctly, you're really missing out on discussion opportunities. What I will try to do is plan those discussions during the session. So I'll make notes of, oh, something interesting happened here. I gave this participant an instruction and they misinterpreted it and they went in the wrong direction. I'm going to like make a mental or actually write it down, like a note of what happened, so that in that time that I've already scheduled with my team, if it's remote, we can have a discussion about that. All right, did you notice at this time what happened? And really quiz people and say, like, who, like, somebody give me an answer. Like, what happened in that session? What went wrong when I gave this person this task or when I asked them this question? Let them kind of think about it. And I really like to pause people and say, all right, what would you do if you were in that situation? What are some tactics? What are some follow-up questions? What are some follow-up instructions? Like, really let people think through, how do I respond in the moment to these kinds of situations? And I have found that, like, this is why experienced researchers are so good and novice researchers really struggle, because the more you do this, the more you encounter those situations, the more you notice them, the more you can adapt, and you kind of have an arsenal and a toolkit. So I'm trying to help the teams that I train build up that toolkit for themselves, whether we're doing that remotely or in person.
Totally. It's interesting. The more I learn about researchers, I just realize a lot of your role is being a teacher, not just teaching non-researchers about research, but your own team itself, and coaching. And a lot of those skills are super valuable. We have a question from Nicole that I think is kind of interesting. What are some of the most common or detrimental mistakes you see novice UX teams making when it comes to conducting user research?
Okay. So this is, and I've seen some other questions people have asked, like, that are kind of tangential or related. Like, I think we had one question that was like, what are some of the common mistakes you see non-researchers making when they're starting user researchers? So whatever someone's role is, whether they are actually like full-time UX researcher, if they're like a UX generalist, or even if they're not in a UX role, the number one mistake I see people make when they're new to UX research is underestimating how difficult it is. Because it does look easy, or like it seems easy before you do it. It seems like, yeah, I'll just talk to this person, I'll ask them questions. It's not until you actually get into the session that you might start to notice, oh wait, that was the wrong way to ask that question. That was the wrong way to phrase that task, and now my participant's looking at me not knowing what I want from them. So I think there's a misunderstanding about why we need training for research. I think this is a huge problem right now with the spread of democratizing research. V says she lost the live. It looks like, I wonder if.
Oh, sorry, V. Hopefully you can hop back in.
Okay.
Sydney, my colleague Sydney is on it. Carry on, Kate.
Okay. I just saw, though, in the chat, Tommaso said the importance of pilots. Yes. Pilot studies or pilot tests, pilot interviews, just kind of test runs before you run your full study. So this should be conducted with real participants, not Dave from accounting. That's not going to help you. You need to be conducting it with actual participants. But why is a pilot test valuable? It helps you catch issues and mistakes before you start running the full study. While pilot tests, I think, are a great strategy for testing study setup, there's kind of this broader problem, which is a lack of exposure to actually planning and conducting research. And I think it's not until somebody is either like deeply involved in that or does it themselves often that they realize, oh, this is more complicated than I thought. It's not just a matter of like going to my customer and saying, what do you want? Oh, wait, that's not going to give me good, reliable, useful data. So getting back to this like concept of democratizing research, which is, as many of you probably know, like super controversial among researchers. because we tend to be sometimes a little gatekeepy. I'm guilty of this. Like, I have a very specific idea of how I want research to run, and it's going to bother me if it's not run correctly. But this is the reality we're in. There's more research that needs to be done than often, we have enough researchers on the team available to do it. Now, obviously, our preference would be hire more researchers, stop cutting your research teams. I do think we have to separate like our argument of how things should be and instead think about how they unfortunately actually are. So I think that one of the big benefits of democratizing research, of getting more cross-functional roles involved with research, whether that's like bringing them in to be more part of the planning, having them observe, teaching them to actually facilitate and run research themselves, getting them involved with like analysis workshops. I don't think we should be afraid of that. I think that's one of the only ways that we're going to help stakeholders and teammates really understand what research is, why it's valuable, why it's not always straightforward or obvious, and how it can help our organization. So I think there's a really good like buy-in benefit when democratization is done correctly.
100%. That segues nicely into this question from Maria. She asks, what advice would you give for situations where non-researchers question the methods and or don't agree with why and how to do research, which you started to hint at. So yeah. Curious your thoughts.
Oh man, this is a huge question because that can happen in so many different forms. Like there's so many different ways that this can manifest. So sometimes, let's take for an example, something that's really common where you're talking to a business leader and you're saying like, hey, we ran this study, we had 12 participants, these are results. And they say, well, that's not enough people. So it's often like, this is a commonly encountered problem where there's a lack of respect or understanding for qualitative research and its value. Often our instinct in this case is to try to educate, try to explain, try to say like, well, no, actually, based on, this study that was conducted by Jacob Nielsen, actually 85% of issues in an interface can be uncovered with about 5 to 8 participants in a single lightweight usability test. We can do that. Sometimes that's valuable. Sometimes that's productive. Sometimes it's not. So what I really advocate for, like this is kind of going beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, but I think this is a huge issue right now in our industry because money's tight, budgets are tight, and researchers are unfortunately being cut. We have to think about our stakeholders as customers. So what would you do if this person was one of your users? Figure out what they actually need. What is it about the data that's not convincing enough for them or doesn't seem reliable enough for them? What are they really trying to get you to articulate? Is it a level of risk that you need to help them understand? Is it, I think often it also matters if this is before or after you've conducted the research. So is this happening, like, is this preventing the research from getting done? Or is this something that's happening after the research was conducted where people are questioning your findings? I think you're going to take different approaches and different tacks in either case. I also will say sometimes I have in the past said, all right, we're going to do a quantitative study just because you want the quantitative data. So, all right, let's do it. Let's get the quantitative data. This is where analytics is particularly useful because it's fast and cheap among the quantitative methods that we have at our disposal. So I'm telling you that we ran this study with 12 participants and 8 out of the 12 encountered this serious problem with this enterprise product. And you don't believe me? All right, let's look at the data. Let's look at the quantitative data. Let's pull up, the error reports. Let's see how often people are encountering this error page or whatever. Let's quantify it.
Totally. I know we're jumping around, but I wanted to quickly ask, this was a question I thought of before, but how do you kind of tailor your communication and research deliverables to meet the needs of these different stakeholders? I know you talked about kind of doing research with them to figure out, bringing them into the research process, but when you're delivering those insights, maybe delivering hard news or information they may not like to hear, how do you tailor that?
Yeah. That's also a great question because I have definitely been guilty in the past of delivering literally over 100-page research reports. We have as a group, all right, I love research. I love researchers. Like we tend to be very like curious people and we love learning things for its own sake. And that is a strong skill and it's something that businesses need. And that level of curiosity serves you well over the lifetime of your career. Not everybody feels that way. This is something I have learned and I have to continually remind myself of, that just because I think this data is neat doesn't mean that my audience is going to think that. I've had to learn that even with like the way I write articles on nngroup.com. I want to like wax philosophical about all the nuances of the way the research was conducted, but like not everybody cares about that. We have to think about what is the information that this audience needs and wants. I also, since I moved I still do research, but a little bit less now that I'm more in a leadership role. But when I moved into leadership, I suddenly was like, oh, I get it now. I get why you're like, no, just tell me just the facts. Like you tell me just really quickly, what problem were you trying to solve or investigate? What did you learn from the study that's relevant to the business? And give me advice that's going to be practical. Don't tell me people asked for this thing that like there's no way our company is ever going to be able to build that. Save that for blue sky ideation workshop someday, but don't tell me about that right now. Like I need solutions to problems. I need to know how confident you are in your recommendation. And I need that to be presented in a way that's really easy for me to consume. So especially if you're presenting to people in more leadership roles, a layered approach is so useful. So give me the bullet points and then attach the full deck. If I'm curious and I have the time and I want to dig in deeper, let me do that. I also think this is another place where modern research tools are super helpful. We use Dovetail as our research repository. There are so many good research repository tools out there. You don't have to use Dovetail, but if your team is not using one right now, you really should look into it because it has absolutely sped up our workflow insanely. And it also allows for that layering structure really well. So for example, in Dovetail, there's a feature called Insights, which is basically where you type up your analysis and you can directly embed different tagged clips from your data right in that page. And then it's linked. So if somebody wants to go look at the raw data, they can do that as well. So that kind of like layered approach is extremely useful. And I mean, that's probably not something that's only useful to leadership people. Everybody's busy. Everybody's overworked. So structuring things so that they're easy to consume and you're answering the questions that people have. These are just the basics of good UX writing. So again, let's turn that internal. Let's turn those best practices on our own outputs.
Totally. And like you said too, I think those tactics for communicating to stakeholders are also useful for communicating to the broader org as well, because you want to loop in everyone in your company to what's happening in research. That just helps everyone. That's valuable for everyone to be locked in, and using some of those same tactics goes a long way. You can kind of do it once and benefit in multiple ways. So we have an interesting question from Elaine, and as many of you probably know, Kate was very influential on the user research maturity model that NNG put out. So she has lots of great thoughts on maturity, and Elaine asked this. So she says, my organization shifted to a more customer-centric mindset. Awesome. And this is great. However, I'm working on getting us to the next level of maturity, moving beyond listing feature requests. And this customer asked for this or that to a place where we can perform some deeper, it got cut off, my bad. Deeper analysis and uncover the root cause beneath user requests. Do you have any advice on how to approach this problem?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a good one. That really is. So Elaine, that is like the next level. Like, and I definitely feel that when on more of like a macro level, or micro level, I guess, when I'm training individual researchers, that is the sort of the escalation from like somebody who can do research to somebody who is a researcher, who's able to sort of, I think a lot of it is context. So being able to keep in mind this person that I'm talking to right now, the question that I just asked them or the task that I just gave them. So that's kind of like the first level. Then we have a level up, which is keeping in mind what are my research goals for this particular study. What are the other things I've heard from other users or from past studies? And then moving that up another level is thinking about where does this fit in the context of this business or this problem space or this market. And that does take, it's deep analytical thinking. And it's a bit dangerous because sometimes we can sort of extrapolate and so I think it's something that for many people, for many individuals, happens over time. For organizations, I think as an industry, this is a very, very interesting time to be in UX research. In some ways, an awful time, and in other ways, a great time. But I think something we're all kind of experiencing right now is we're sort of butting up against a limitation of the way that our organizations have worked and the way that UX has worked in the past, which has been very focused on individual products. So kind of like narrowly focused or like thinking about UI. In order to really have an impact, researchers and designers need to be integrated kind of another level up, where we're instead thinking more about the journey, the market, the user, these sort of like larger questions. And like I just said, like when you're in the moment, you're trying to deliver a product and you need an answer to a very specific question, that's not what you're thinking about. So how do we tackle these bigger, broader questions of who are our users and what do they really want? And are we serving those needs? If not, how do we serve those needs? That really does require a lot of top-down buy-in. So it's great that your company is already moving in that direction, Elaine. The next step is, all right, how do we do more research? How do we do it more often? How do we fit it in earlier before we start designing things? How do we move it up earlier in the product cycle? And then can we take it even a step further and start thinking more about the journey? Like, how do we reach across product teams? So it's not just I'm working on the mobile app, I'm working on the back end system that the sales reps see, I'm working on the email communications. How do we stitch these disparate product teams together and then deliver insights that they need from our research to really tailor omni-channel experiences to our customers? That's like the big challenge. It's not going to happen overnight. Every time I talk about UX maturity with people, they're like, can you just give me a list of things that I can do to fix this? Cultural change is hard. It is often outside of the control of an individual. So like, first of all, internalize that, give yourself some grace, and like your team and your company and even your company's leadership, give them some grace. It does tend to take time. And sometimes it doesn't always happen linearly, like the way that we want it to. One of the things I unfortunately have to tell people about UX maturity is it is very possible to backslide. And I would say if I could take an average of UX maturity across the industry right now, I think we're, as an average, kind of backsliding a bit. So bear that in mind if you're frustrated with your individual organization. It sounds like you're making forward progress, and that's always a good thing, even if you're already thinking about how do we move to the next level.
I love all that. And it's funny. I've had the same opinion as I've researched maturity of like, where's the clear steps? Why can't I just jump? Like, where's the golden ticket that takes you to the next level? And it's just not.
I wish I had one.
It's
I'm
not
sorry.
that I know. I wish we could give that to everyone, but no, and it is just so interesting how unique there are some broad like aspects of maturity that are common to everyone, but a lot of it's just unique to your individual organization and your product and the people on your team and your customers, which just makes it such a meaty kind of like tough to chew topic, I think a lot of times. Really interested to still dive more into kind of upskilling non-researchers and involving them in research. And Jacqueline had a question here. That was, what are some of the best ways a product designer can support a research project, and what are things to avoid? And that kind of feels similar to your discussion about bringing in all these disparate teams together and kind of cohesion in research.
Yeah. So, all right. So this, Jacqueline's asking about a specific role here, but I will kind of broaden that a little bit and be thinking more about generally like non-researcher roles. Like, I think, again, if we get back to democratization, like this is a challenge that a lot of teams are trying to figure out. I think that one of the first things we all need to accept and understand and appreciate is it's not cool to assume that because of somebody's job role, they're automatically going to think or behave a certain way. We do have a tendency to, again, be a little gatekeepy and kind of say things like, oh, well, developers aren't good at research. Visual designers aren't good at research. I have a confession. I am an ex-developer. I started in this field as a front-end dev, and I definitely felt that way. I was interested in UX at the time, and I was trying to get more involved, and I did feel shut out from that and kind of not welcomed, not kind of brought in or integrated. I didn't feel like my perspective was valuable, which is wild. Like we say all the time that like to do product design and experience design well, we need to be cross-functional. There's so much value in being cross-functional. We cannot be cross-functional if we're going to try to put people in these little buckets and decide that like, no, they can't do research. I actually have a specific story about this. So a few years back, we hired a fresh crop of wonderful new folks at NNG. Some of them were more experienced in UX and research. Some of them were less experienced. And one of the women that we hired at the time was fresh out of undergrad, pure visual design, like graphic design, no like UX or research experience whatsoever. So I was training this group of kind of cross-disciplinary people with very diverse backgrounds, and I was training them in how to do research. And I have to say, like, I did have kind of some preconceived notions about who was going to be easier to train and harder to train. And I was completely proven wrong. This like young woman, fresh out of undergrad, like no experience. She was great. She was a natural. She had really good, I talk a lot with people about research instincts, like the ability, I think it is a lot of like contextual analytical thinking. She had that in spades. She required very little coaching from me on facilitation, and every pointer I gave her, she was able to internalize that and use it and apply it right away in her facilitation style. So again, we really need to not pigeonhole people when we're bringing them on and helping them get involved in research. Now, that said, there are some cases where like I have encountered people where I'm like, well, you're never really going to be a great researcher. see the antithesis of that sort of natural instinctual skill set. That is often the case with your stakeholders, where I'm sure you can think of some people right now who you're like, I do not want to let you talk to a customer because you're going to say something crazy. And that is fine. We can accept that. But again, I wouldn't put anybody in that category just because of their job role or their experience level. One of the low risk, lightweight ways to get people more involved with research without running that like risk of things are going to go off the rails is getting people more involved in the planning and the analysis portions of the research project. Certainly, having them observe is also useful. Having them take notes is also useful. But I find that people, especially the planning side, if I can get more of my stakeholders involved in discussing, all right, what are we going to learn from this? What do we need from this study? How might we set it up? I can sort of get them thinking like researchers and also get them more bought into this particular project. And they're more likely then to trust the results when they see them.
Totally. And I love the thought of bringing them into the process and the planning, because I think that just provides such important exposure to all the things that go into conducting research. And I think having not come from a research background, you definitely have conceptions that it's not that much work. I don't know. It's just like you think it's like, oh, and I hate to say that. And I've repented, I promise. Like research is a lot of work, but there's that conception of, oh, you just chat with the customer. It's just a conversation.
Yeah.
And it is so not that. And there's so much to it. And so I think having stakeholders really see like there's a lot of intention, there's a lot of thought, a lot of hours. That can be valuable for so many reasons. That can give you more buy-in, more budget, more awareness of like, hey, we're doing a lot with a small team, which I know many people probably tuning in are a small team and just like strapped and doing so much with so little. So I do love that, like bringing them in to the beginning.
Yeah, that's so true. I still remember the very first usability test I ever ran. And I went into it being like, well, that was easy. Like I'm pretty extroverted. I was like, I can talk to people all day. That's fine. And I got in it. I was like, oh shit. I was like, this is going really poorly.
Yeah, as a similarly extroverted person, I know there are probably so many things with research that I would just miss the mark completely. So, but luckily there are wonderful people that train. And the thing that I think is very cool about research, and I know we've talked about it's easy to gatekeep, and I know there's a lot of feelings of like democratization, like degrades the role of the researcher. I always think of it on the opposite end of like, researchers have really cool skill sets and information and tools that everyone in an organization can benefit from. Like I think back to previous roles I've had at different companies, and I wish I'd been connected with the research. I mean, some of the companies didn't even have researchers, which is horrifying looking back, but there's so many skills you can learn. Yeah. And I think researchers, and I feel bad saying this because I know it's also adding more to researchers' plates of like, hey, train all these people. But it is a cool role to have in a company to really connect your colleagues to the customers in really intentional, smart ways. Yeah. So with that,
let me just tack onto that, especially because I just saw in the chat that Edith said, I think we fear losing our jobs. And I think that anxiety is like so tied into our resistance to democratization. And for sure, there are companies out there that are doing this in a really shitty way. They're just being like, yeah, but what if we just like tacked on, like, what if we fired all of these people who have specialized in this thing? And instead we just tacked on another job to all of our existing staff. Like that seems more cost effective. So like that is happening. That has happened. Unfortunately, that will probably continue to happen until these companies start to learn from their mistakes, if they ever do. And that sucks. But I think there's another way to look at this and another way that this can unfold. Again, I'm not saying it's all on us or within our control, but I have seen this done in ways where it's such an advantage because it does increase that buy-in, that understanding. It's more inclusive and less pedantic. It's less of me being like, well, in this particular study in 1996, Dr. Jacob Nielsen found, like that. It's less of that, and it's more learning by doing and helping people understand this mindset and helping them see that, oh, the researchers are giving me the things I need to do my job really well, whether that's the insights and the information and the perspectives and the direction, or that's the tools, that the techniques that I need to understand to do this in a lightweight way for myself and for my team. So like we can, and again, I'm not saying this is the case in all situations, but we can in some cases use this as a tool to amplify our impact and improve understanding throughout the organization.
Totally. And Elaine, there's been a great conversation happening in the chat that I'm gonna catch up on later. But Elaine mentioned too that she's used democratization to free up her researchers' time to focus on discovery and strategic projects. And I know that's come up in the chat as well. Of like, well, how do we spend more time on that? And I think done right, democratization can really help that. And it's interesting too. I've had lots of conversations about democratization because it's just such an interesting topic. And I've heard it said a lot of that. It really matters the foundation you start on. And like, there's lots of ways to democratize and there are common pitfalls, but like trying to start really well, even if it's small, can kind of mitigate. And maybe you're not going to like, same with maturity, reach that peak golden like part of democratization quickly, but starting small, starting intentional can really help. So that being said, yeah.
Wait, you go. Sorry, I'm never going to let you ask another question.
That's okay. That's okay.
Too good of a conversation in the chat. So yeah, so like Elaine, I think like brings up a good point that it matters what kind of research you are democratizing. There are certain types of research that more strategic, the more discovery research, that sort of we're kind of thinking about like how we raise that up a level, where it is more critical that you have people who know what they're doing and also people who have been trained to recognize their own biases and try to catch those in their research as much as possible. Because in discovery research, in strategic research, where we're saying like, who are these people? What do they want? Like, what could we possibly build? There is more risk that someone will take their preconceived idea of what they think people want, project that, or even like run the study in a way that just, it's often, I find, not done consciously. It's not somebody setting out being like, I'm just going to find data to back up my mindset, but that is happening in their brains. So the risk is higher there. I do think evaluative research, we had a good question about this too, if I'll ever let you ask another one.
No, you're good. You're good. I was trying to find that same question. I think I'm thinking of the same one, but keep going. I'll try to find it.
So like evaluative research is where, you're like, okay, we designed this thing. We're pretty confident it's going to work. We just got to fine tune it. We got to figure out what's working, what's not, what we need to change. Does this label make sense in this, UI, the one that we thought would work? That's where I find like having designers run that type of study, they're great at that. Like because they work on it. They know the product really well. They're also extremely invested in getting that answer. They do, I think and this can sometimes be true. There's a misconception that, we can't have the designers study their own products because they're too attached and invested and they won't listen. Again, that's kind of condescending. That's kind of rude. I've found that designers are very capable of artistic distance from what they've designed. I mean, they're literally trained in many cases in a lot of programs to do design critiques with each other. So like they are open to negative feedback. So I think that's a little disrespectful to sort of paint every designer with that brush.
Totally. And I love, Edith also shared this and I agree. Like sharing UX responsibilities. And I do think, I wish more organizations had more knowledge and skill sharing. Like one part of being like having a job is growing your own skill set and growing your own like knowledge. And so I think researchers can really, there can be cross sharing as well. As we as researchers help train non-researchers, those non-researchers can also share their own skills and knowledge from their role, and like everyone benefits from that. I also like what you're kind of saying about identifying the strengths of not just your research team, but outside of the research team, recognizing what designers are really good with or good at, or not even just designers as a whole, but like Sarah on the design team, like she might have an extra interest in something specific in research or that sort of thing. And I love that idea too, of knowing your team really well and identifying where they can be the strongest and maybe where they might need a little help. And I think that can also help guide the training itself. Because as we've talked about training, I just keep thinking, wow, that probably feels like a lot of extra work for some folks to like be thinking through not just their own upskilling, but their team's upskilling and then the broader organization. So I don't know, any thoughts you have there?
Yeah, for sure. So like, it does feel like a lot of work, but to kind of bring it back to where we started, that question about like, how do you sort of upskill people over time? Bite-sized pieces. Bite-sized pieces. Yes. We have to cram this into everybody's existing jobs. So it's not going to happen overnight. It will be overwhelming that way. And also people I find don't retain information that way as much. So it's going to take time. It's going to take practice. It's going to take a lot of exposure to these concepts over time. I also don't feel like this is every researcher's responsibility. Like this to me is something that, you know, if you're in an organization that's fortunate enough to have leadership roles for UX or UX research, that's something that, you know, maybe that's some of the people in this group today. Then that's, in my opinion, more that person's responsibility to be thinking about it, and also thinking about it from like a system, like a service design perspective. So not just like, what's the need? Who do we need to train? How do we make that happen? Like, who's going to do that? When are they going to do this? How, you know, how frequently are we going to do these lunch and learns? What are the topics? Let's just plan those out ahead of time. You know, how do we keep this lightweight? It doesn't have to be like a beautiful, perfect deck. It can just be like, we're having, you know, a workshop where we have a, you know, our director of research talk about a topic, talk about thematic analysis, and then we'll give people some discussion questions, send them off into little Zoom rooms or little breakout groups, and just have them discuss. Like, don't overthink it. Like, even these small little ways of sort of frequently getting people to think about these things, that can pay off.
Totally. And I'm sure you would agree too that the best way to figure out what's going to work is just to try things and kind of be scrappy. And then if like one method like lunch and learns isn't working at your organization, pivot, try something different. But like, you'll never know what's going to work for your, like the people on your team until you try. So I think that's great advice. This is kind of a pivot, but I really want to ask, because I know you've been doing a lot of research about AI and tooling. And so David, David, ask the question we all, you know, kind of want to know, but just wanted to toss this in. He's wondering, with the rise of AI, how you kind of see those complementing research methods.
I mean, it's been both hilarious and frustrating to see how many of these startups that are building these like massively overnight successful AI products, they were not doing any research. Like, I've been studying this a lot. Like, this is kind of part of I kind of see myself as like an assignment editor at NNG. Like, so part of my job is to be keeping up with the industry and the trends and seeing what people are talking about, and then figuring out where we go to study those things. So I've been meeting with lots of the leadership folks at various AI startups, especially those targeting UX research. And it's been quite disappointing when I ask them about what kind of research they're doing on their own products, because it's often very, very little. So yeah, I think there's like, this has been a big topic over the past year, is like the value that we could provide to these kinds of products. Similarly, like David's asking, with more integration of AI powered, you can think about it as kind of like super analytics, or, I mean, let's take it even further, like more AI powered features in products. You know, one of the things I think we're going to start seeing is basically personalization on steroids. Like we all these companies have been collecting these massive data sets. They just haven't really been able to like make sense of them or process them. And AI is going to help a lot in that, is helping a lot in that. I think where qualitative research and also more broadly UX design comes into play there is AI needs guardrails. We have to create like a lane that we keep these tools in. Otherwise, they do crazy, crazy things. I see Maria. Wait, is that Maria Rosala, or is that a different Maria? Anyway, sorry, got distracted by the chat. And but yeah, so there's going to be all of these like opportunities to integrate AI in our processes, and also in our designs and our products and our experiences. And again, you know, kind of bringing it back to where we started today, like things change and they also don't change. So like they're like human nature, the best way to understand people's thoughts, desires, needs, behaviors is just to study it. So like we still are going to be needed, and in fact maybe more needed, to help guide the way that AI is going to change our work and our products.
Totally. Should we give Maria some thoughts?
I'm guessing that's a different Maria. So I wrote an article on this, on synthetic personas, with a coworker, Maria Rosales. She's currently moving, so I would be surprised if she happened to jump in.
She pops in here just to ask.
So I guess that's another Maria. Yeah, so synthetic personas. Well, actually, I wonder if this person even knows that I wrote an article on this, or if that's just a weird coincidence. Anyway, I wrote an article on this with Maria, specifically about a product called synthetic users. So this is yes, thank you, Sydney. This is more broadly a concept of synthetic users, which is basically having AI impersonate your users. There is also a specific product called synthetic users. So Maria and I kicked the tires on this. Our immediate reaction, to be totally transparent. Okay, sorry, Maria. So funny. My immediate reaction and Maria's was like, absolutely not. Like there's something like visceral. Like, can we just make our AI pretend to be our users? Only if you're gonna sell your product to the AI. However, I do think this is actually a potentially useful tool now, and I think it will become more useful in the future. Please do not replace your users with AI. You just should never, ever do that. No matter what happens with AI tool advancements, you shouldn't do that. But what these basically do is, so I'll talk about synthetic users specifically, because that's one of the tools we really focused on. It has been well designed, this product. We spoke with the founder, and I think his approach to making this product was a good one. I do think the marketing leads people to believe that they can eliminate the need for research by having this tool. But essentially what it does is it puts a face on the internet. So these systems have been trained on all of the internet's data. And so if you want to learn about a specific user group, American teenagers, there's been a lot of surveys and published academic research done on American teenagers. So basically it's digesting all of that information and then putting a face on it, and you can ask it questions. We think this is actually a really useful tool for desk research right now. Especially as consultants, we're often being brought into domains and problem spaces that we don't understand at all. One of my clients was a company that made geographic information modeling systems. I still can't even remember the full name. And so that was way over my head, but I have to do research with these people, so I need a basic understanding of what they do. It's kind of nice to be able to have this summarized desk research in a very convenient package to set me up for success. But I'm still going to do my real research, right? I'm not just going to stop there. What I'm excited for is there are definitely, I've talked to some founders who are working on this. There are definitely going to be products that are going to come out, which are going to be synthetic personas based on your data set. So once you've gathered a lot of real research findings, you're going to be able to put that AI face on one of your customer groups, basically. That to me is way more valuable. So the research is still happening. This is just kind of a new, it's like if you can just talk to a persona instead of it just being a flat representation, you can talk to it. That is, I think, an example of one of the more strategic, useful potential use cases of AI and UX, which is helping us to disseminate the information that we gather, making it easier for our stakeholders to consume when they need it. That is something I'm quite excited for. That's one of my optimistic feelings about AI and UX.
Sure. We have 2 more minutes, so I'm just going to throw in this last AI question. Brian asked, how do you deal with hallucinations and not being able to truly trust its output if you're using it for desk research?
Yeah, that is a risk. This is a risk with all AI. You should never, okay, this is taking me back. I don't know who else has been around this long, but this is taking me back to the early days of Wikipedia in schools. And I remember being in school and hearing from a school librarian, you shouldn't use Wikipedia. You shouldn't use, okay, you can use Wikipedia, but you have to make sure that you look at your sources. That is true of AI. AI is the new Wikipedia. We do need to check sources, especially if you're using a general purpose tool like ChatGPT. If you've ever asked ChatGPT for information and to cite its sources, it just makes shit up. It's actually kind of hilarious. We find fake NNG articles written by people who have never existed, or like Erica Hall, who does exist but has never worked at NNG. So don't just stop with the information it gives you if it is something related to your work. This really depends on like, what's the risk? If you trust this information and it's wrong, what's going to happen? If I am looking for recipes, like I have a bunch of tomatoes from the farmer's market and I want to know what recipes, like what things I can make with all these tomatoes, that's pretty low risk. I don't really have to, unless it tells me to like put glue on a pizza or whatever that recent example was. I don't need to fact check. If I'm trying to make important decisions for my company where we're going to be investing resources and time and money, I better do my own primary research. Like I better take that the step further.
100%. Anyway, we're at the hour. I could have chatted for another 3 hours easy. And we have plenty more. Yeah, we'll do it again, round 2. Thank you everyone for joining. We will be sharing a recording, and we'll also be sharing all the ways you can connect with Kate and keep up to date on what NNG is doing and all those awesome trainings that she is running. So thank you for joining, everyone. Hope you have a good rest of your day. And Kate, thank you again. This was delightful.
Thank you. Thanks everybody. This was so fun.
Thanks everyone.